مشاهدينا مرحبا بكم في حوارات السياق. رحبت السعودية والولايات المتحدة في بيان مشترك بتمديد الهدنة في السودان لمدة 5 أيام من أجل السماح ببذل جهود إنسانية إضافية. عموما للمزيد من المتابعة ينضم إلينا السفير تيبور مساعد وزير الخارجية الأمريكي للشؤون الإفريقية السابق. أستاذ تيبور مرحبا بك معنا.
Thank you so much for having me.
وكأننا دخلنا مرحلة الهدن من دون اتفاقات لإنهاء الصراع. هل يعد هذا اتجاها لتجميد النزاع أو لتحويله إلى نزاع طويل الأمد؟
Yeah. Here's the thing. Unfortunately, when this kind of a thing happens, the world reacts immediately with a keen desire to do something, anything at all, to take action. But at the end of the day, the two people involved in the fighting, the two generals, are the ones who determine whether there will be a ceasefire or not. So while the entire international community is terribly frustrated, and as we see, the Africa Union now has issued a very concise and comprehensive road plan for peace. But it all depends on the two generals because no one can make them stop fighting.
لكن في هذه الحال ما هي فرص الحل في السودان؟
Yes, I believe there is a chance for a solution, but that solution would only come from the two generals deciding that it is their interest, that it's much more to their advantage to stop fighting than it is to continue the fighting. As long as either one believes that they can win militarily, I fear that all of these peace plans will just end up on paper.
كيف تقيم الوضع الإنساني في السودان وما مدى تأثير اتفاقات الهدنة على الأزمة الإنسانية؟
I think the two sides agreed to cease fires to seem to the international community to be interested in the welfare of the civilians. You have to look into the human heart for motivation. I'm not sure that the motivation is there and they really mean it. It seems to me that they do this just so they can tell the international community that they are interested and that they want to provide humanitarian assistance. Every day, more and more people in Sudan need assistance. I think the current estimate is that half of Sudan's population, or 25 million people, need some kind of aid. I mean, just imagine how horrendous that is. 25 million people on its own is a fairly large country. So everybody wants to provide assistance. Everybody wants to take care of the civilians, except the two people that are doing the fighting.
هل باعتقادك أن مسألة اللا عقوبات على الطرف الذي ينتهك اتفاق الهدنة هو ما فاقم الوضع؟
Here's the problem with that. Sanctions tend to be more effective with the threat to use sanctions as opposed to actually applying the sanctions. Because once you've applied the sanctions, there are no bullets left in your gun. So you have nothing else to shoot. And how effective would the sanctions be against these two sides? Because they obviously have their own mechanisms around the sanctions, whether it's, General Hamedi with his gold dealing or General Burhan who has ties, with other countries. So the sanctions really are not that effective. I think the sanctions make us all feel better, that the threat is there. The end of the day, the only effective means for the international community to put a stop to this is if there was a unanimous effort to stop weapons from getting to the two sides and a unanimous effort on sanctions, which would mean Russia, China, the Arab countries, the Europeans, the Americans, the Africans, everybody.
وكانك تخبرني أن العقوبات في هذه الحال غير مجدية. إذا كانت كذلك لماذا استخدمها الغرب مع روسيا بعد الحرب مع أوكرانيا؟
The sanctions can be useful if they are targeted and if they are applied against people who actually use the dollar system. Because, with say some of the Russian oligarchs who had millions or billions of dollars in Western banks, if you sanction them, then you're really hurting them. But if you're talking about somebody like General Hamedi, who ships gold out of the country and can bypass the dollar system and, get his valuables and other means, then they're not that effective.
هذا ما يدفعني إلى سؤالك، ما الذي يريد الطرفان تحقيقه عند هذه المرحلة؟
Unfortunately, I think that's very simple. Each of the parties wants to win and be in charge of Sudan because they each have enormous economic interests at stake. So it is not just General Burhan and General Hamedi. Each of them has obviously, people behind them that really want them to succeed. So for right now, their calculation is that it is more to their advantage to keep fighting than to stop fighting.
باعتقادك هل تضاءلت احتمالية انتقال الصراع إلى الدول المجاورة؟
I don't think so. I think that the threat will grow as the conflict goes on. If it goes on for a very long time, say as long as the northern Ethiopian war did, several years, then I think the impact will become greater and greater. Because if you look at Sudan's 7 neighbors, in each of those 7 countries, there are problems, in some more severe than others. I mean, just look at the situation right now in Western Sudan and Darfur, because you have ethnic groups involved there, and it's becoming more an ethnic versus ethnic than really what's going on in Khartoum. Some of those ethnic groups obviously have roots across the border in Chad, and we know that Chad has its own problems going on now, with an insurrection against the Chadian government. So unfortunately, the longer it goes on, I fear that the more likely that it will become a regional as opposed to just a Sudanese conflict.
إذا أردنا أن نفهم خارطة الدول الحليفة أو الدول الداعمة للطرفين المتحاربين في السودان، هل لك أن تشرحها لنا؟
Each of the countries, that have an interest in this have either one side or the other that they favor, but for some countries, it's a little bit more complicated. For example, look at Russia. Russia has had long dealings with the Sudanese government, represented by General Burhan, but then the Russian mercenary group Wagner has ties with General Hamedi on the gold mining and through Wagner's dealings with General Haftar in Libya. So the Russians are basically what you would say covering both sides, and they're waiting to see which side will end up winning. For the Egyptians have long ties to the Sudanese army, but on the other hand, as we all know, Egypt is also concerned with the Islamists. And in the Sudanese army, a lot of the officer corps came up through, during the Omar al-Bashir government, and they obviously have ties to Islamists. So for almost every country, they have one side or the other that they favor, but it is more nuanced than just, clear cut. That's why I believe that it would be easier to try to get everybody together to say we will no longer allow any weapons or ammunition into Sudan. But that's not a complete solution either, because the Sudanese can make their own weapons. The Sudanese have factories that manufacture weapons.
عند هذه المرحلة هل تتحكم الدول الداعمة في قرار الربط والحل في السودان؟
I don't think so. The way the international system used to work, there was a crisis, the United Nations Security Council would get together and they would send in, peacekeeping forces. It seems like that has stopped because no one is suggesting that anybody is going to send peacekeeping forces to Sudan at this time. So you have this terrible situation where you have two sides that each has a different advantage. So each of them still believes that they can somehow have a military solution. So this is the kind of struggle that as long as they keep getting their weapons, it can just go on and on and on. We're talking about, months or maybe even, years. And every day the situation in the country deteriorates. So the solution, again, I keep stressing the solution has to come from the two people involved deciding that they have to stop or there's a reason for them to stop.
السفير تيبور ناج، شكرا جزيلا لك للمشاركة معنا في حوارات السياق.
Thank you so much.
مشاهدينا، شكرا على طيب المتابعة. إلى الملتقى.